Life, it has been said, is a journey. Culture, literature and music often use the metaphor of being on a path or a road to symbolise that journey. As the lyrics to a popular Led Zeppelin song go, yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. You may also be familiar with poet Robert Frost's words here. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. One of the most famous books in American literature is called On the Road. The plot features a couple of young men in the 1950s wandering around the United States and Mexico, but is ultimately also the story of a man searching for answers to the deeper questions in life. His name was Jack Kerouac. He was the author of On the Road and one voice from a group of writers and poets called the Beats. Like us, the Beats were looking for the answers to the hard questions. Who are we? Why are we here? And what is the purpose of our lives? In this program called The Beat Generation, we're going to look at who these people were, how they lived, and what we can learn from their journey that can perhaps help us on our own journey as well.
It has stood the test of time. God's book, the Bible, still relevant in today's complex world. It is written, sharing hope around the globe.
One of the most famous cities in the world is San Francisco in California. You may be familiar with some of the city's famous landmarks. First, there's the Golden Gate Bridge across the bay. And then there's Alcatraz, a small island in the San Francisco Bay. It was originally used as a lighthouse, then as a military base, then as a military prison, and most famously, from 1933 to 1963 as a US federal penitentiary. I would imagine, though, that when most people think of San Francisco, they don't think of this place right here near the corner of Broadway Street and Columbus Avenue, just along from Chinatown. It's a bookstore called City Lights. Now, in the age of Kindles and iPads, bookstores are becoming scarce, and independent bookstores even more so. City Lights is even rarer than most bookstores because it's the spiritual home of an influential literary movement called the Beats, or the Beat Generation. The Beats were a group of writers and poets whose literature explored and influenced American culture, primarily in the 1950s. Their legacy continues today. Just look at all the films that are still being made about them. Beat, with Courtney Love and Kiefer Sutherland in 2000. Howl, with James Franco in 2010. On the Road, with Kirsten Dunst in 2012. Also in 2012, Big Sur, with Josh Lucas and Kate Bosworth. And Kill Your Darlings, with Daniel Radcliffe in 2013. These flicks and many others revolved around themes and stories from the Beats. And City Lights bookstore was their intellectual and spiritual centre. One website even calls City Lights the bookstore that launched the Beat Generation. In 1955, City Lights Press published Howl and other poems, the work of Beat poet Allen Ginsberg. The book was banned by law enforcement authorities, which led to a famous obscenity trial. As a result, both City Lights and the Beats reached national prominence. Some of the most famous lines in American poetry begin with this, the opening of the poem Howl. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night. What powerful imagery! The best minds? Destroyed by madness? Starving, hysterical, naked? Heavy stuff for sure. The title Howl implies protest, anger, and pain. It was a poem about people who were struggling to make sense of the world they'd been born into. A world they did not create, but nonetheless inherited. A world of incredible wealth surrounded by even more incredible poverty. A world of wars, political chaos, violence and alienation. A world where technology changed so fast that people could barely keep up. A world where crass materialism pervaded the very air they breathed. Sound familiar? Although the Beats lived in the 1950s and 60s, they faced many of the same issues that people struggle with today. Now, one of the first questions people ask about the Beats is, where did the name The Beats or the Beat Generation come from? Well, writer Jack Kerouac is credited with introducing the phrase the Beat Generation in 1948 to describe an underground anti-conformist youth movement in New York. The Beats, or the Beat Generation, became the moniker for this group of non-conformist, radical underground writers and poets who came to prominence after World War II. It's also the origin of the word beatnik, a hybrid derived from beat and Sputnik. Now, Sputnik was the world's first artificial satellite put into orbit in 1957 by the Russians, and that scared the daylights out of everyone, especially the Americans. Some argue that the literary forebears of the Beats were a group of writers and poets who lived in Europe after World War I. They were called the Lost Generation. Having come out of the most brutal conflict known to humanity up until that time, they were never able to adjust back to regular society. Hence, they were lost. The Lost Generation included such literary luminaries as Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. In a similar way to the Lost Generation, the Beat Generation arose after World War II. There was, however, one big difference. For the most part, the Lost Generation also represented a loss of faith. They didn't care about anything religious or spiritual. One Hemingway biographer, for example, wrote that Hemingway was devoid of the religious spirit and ceased to practice religion at the earliest possible moment. In contrast, spirituality and faith were very important to the Beats, who always insisted that they were spiritual, and as writer Jack Kerouac said, sweating for affirmation and looking for absolute belief in a divinity of rapture. Now, if you're religious or spiritual, you generally have a sacred text, a Bible for example, and if there was a Bible of the Beats, it would be Kerouac's 1957 novel, On the Road. There's a legend about the writing of On the Road that goes like this. Fueled by inspiration, coffee and speed, Kerouac sat down at his typewriter in a Manhattan apartment and in one long burst of literary inspiration wrote in just 20 days the novel that would make him the voice of his generation. He typed it out on this single 40-meter-long scroll. The scroll itself is still displayed in various museums around the world. On the Road was a big hit and remains to this day the most well-known piece of beat literature. Time magazine named it 55th on its list of 100 best English language novels of the 20th century. At first, the critics weren't impressed. Author Truman Capote quipped about the book, "It isn't writing at all, it's typing." On the Road was basically about two guys, the narrator, Kerouac himself, and his friend, Dean Moriarty, whose real name was Neal Cassidy. Although the storyline was mostly about their free-spirited and wild road trips in the United States and Mexico, the book was also a secular outpouring of frenzied spirituality, written by a man who was trying to make sense of the world. Listen to this excerpt. Suddenly, I found myself on Times Square. I had traveled 8,000 miles around the American continent, and I was back on Times Square, and right in the middle of a rush hour too, seeing with my innocent road eyes the absolute madness and fantastic hurrah of New York with its millions and millions hustling forever for a buck among themselves. The mad, dream-grabbing, taking, giving, sighing, dying, just so they could be buried in those awful cemetery cities beyond Long Island City. We hustle, we rush, we struggle, all part of the mad dream. Grabbing, taking, giving, sighing, dying. And for what? To eventually wind up dead in some cemetery outside Auckland, or Paris, or Sydney? What's the point of that? It makes me think of the words of Jesus, recorded in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 26. What is a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? We live in a society that tends to value wealth, fame, and materialism above all else. The Beats rebelled against this notion. Listen to another excerpt from On the Road. The only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time, the ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, 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 like fabulous yellow Roman candles exploding like spiders across the stars. And in the middle, you see the blue center light pop and everybody goes, oh. You can sense the energy, the power, and the passion in these words. Kerouac was looking for something in life, something beyond what the ordinary rat race gives us. Kerouac was looking for answers. But did he ever find them? After writing On the Road, Kerouac's life headed on a downward spiral of drugs, drink, and an anything-goes sexual lifestyle. He married 3 times, but ultimately would confess that his mother was the only woman he had ever loved. Over the years, Kerouac became more conservative politically, extreme even. Right-wing extremism isn't generally associated with beatniks. Kerouac degenerated into extremely paranoid, anti-communist and anti-Semitic beliefs. It is said that he once told fellow beat Allen Ginsberg, a Jew, that Hitler should have finished what he started. By 1968, unkept and overweight, Kerouac was drinking 12 to 15 shots of whiskey and gulps of beer every hour. He died in 1969 of cirrhosis of the liver, brought on by excessive drinking. He was just 47 years old. Sadly, it doesn't sound like Kerouac ever found answers worth finding. His life certainly didn't seem to suggest it. Nevertheless, his books, especially On the Road, were extremely popular with young people. In the decades that followed, it wasn't unusual to see people hitchhiking across the United States or even other parts of the world with a torn and tattered copy of On the Road tucked snugly under one arm. Another avatar of the Beat generation was poet Allen Ginsberg. Gay, Jewish, radical, leftist, druggy, practitioner of Eastern religion, he was the nightmare of every conservative American Republican Protestant. Ginsberg wrote his famously graphic poem, Howl, at a time when the producers of the American sitcom I Love Lucy wouldn't even allow the word pregnant to be broadcast. This was also the era when CBS instructed the Ed Sullivan Show to display singer Elvis Presley only from the waist up, because the sight of Mr. Presley's gyrating hips in other performances was causing scandal across America. And it was in this time that City Lights published Howl, in which, among other things, Allen Ginsberg openly touted his homosexuality. It's little wonder that the book went to trial. The trial and its context were dramatized in the 2010 movie Howl, with American actor James Franco portraying the young Ginsberg. Allen Ginsberg went on to become a well-known voice in American poetry. He won numerous awards, and out of all the Beats, was considered the most successful. He died at 70 of liver cancer brought about by hepatitis. Unlike most of the other Beats, William Burroughs was born into a wealthy family, with a lineage tracing back to Confederate General Robert E. Lee. He was educated in private schools and went to Harvard before he fell in with Kerouac and other Beats in New York. It wasn't long before he became addicted to heroin. One time, in an apartment in Mexico City, he said to his wife Joan, "I guess it's about time for our William Tell act." She took her highball glass and balanced it on the top of her head. Burroughs fired one shot. He missed the glass and hit her in the head instead. She died instantly. Back in the States, no doubt thanks to family connections, he received a 2-year suspended sentence. His most famous or infamous book, Naked Lunch, was published in 1959. It too was eventually banned in various cities as obscene. Burroughs struggled with heroin and other drugs throughout his whole life. He eventually faded into relative obscurity, dying in Kansas at 83. He lived far longer than skeptics had ever thought possible. For as writer David Sterrett wrote, he was the most incorrigible bad boy of the Beats. And not the least of the Beats was Neal Cassidy. Although he didn't write much, he nevertheless became famous because Dean Moriarty, the main character in On the Road, was based on him. Cassidy grew up in a poor Denver neighborhood and became a hustler at a very early age. He later bragged that he had stolen 500 cars before his 21st birthday. Cassidy eventually made it to New York with his first wife, who was just 15 years old. There he met Kerouac, and they became friends. Cassidy's freewheeling, anything goes, frantic quest to live in the moment, while conversely full of passionate desire to understand life's deep questions, fascinated Kerouac. This is how Kerouac described him: a young jail kid, all hung up on the wonderful possibilities of becoming a real intellectual. Cassidy, though, never became an intellectual, not even close. He was never able to do much with his fame either. He could barely hold down steady employment and wandered from one menial job to another and one marriage to another. He even did a 2-year stint in San Quentin State Prison on a drug charge. Although he was always talking about spiritual subjects, his life was very much lived in the flesh. After a rainy 1968 night of drunken partying in a Mexican village, Neal Cassidy started on a 25-kilometer walk to the next village. Dressed only in jeans, a t-shirt, and stuffed to the gills with drugs and alcohol, he fell asleep beside a train track and died in hospital the next day. He was 42 years old. Is there anything we can possibly learn from the dead Beats and the Beat generation? Like us, they lived in tumultuous and confusing times. Like us, they lived in an age of excessive materialism. And like many of us, they were seeking for answers to spiritual questions. And that's because I think we all sense that there is indeed a spiritual component to our lives. I would like to humbly suggest where I think the Beats in their spiritual quest went down the wrong road. They wanted spirituality and they wanted faith, but they wanted it only on their own terms and in their own way. And things just don't work like that, do they? Say, for example, you decide you want to be healthy and take care of your body, or to be in the best physical shape possible. That's a great decision. But in order to do that, you need to follow the principles and rules that lead to good health. If you sit on your couch all day in front of the TV, washing down potato chips with Coke, and your only exercise is lifting the remote control, it's safe to say that you won't become any healthier. And if it is that way in the physical realm, how much more so in the spiritual? Excessive drug use, excessive drinking, loose sexual practices. This was the foundation of the Beats lifestyle. Now, I don't want to judge these people, but such practices are generally not conducive to growing spiritually and coming to know God. We have a spiritual nature, and I believe that the Bible can help us live according to that nature and help us to be the kind of people we were meant to be. Let's read a few texts together. Please notice Psalm 119, verse 105. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Psalm 25, verses 4 to 5. Show me your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me. For you are the God of my salvation. On you I wait all the day. Proverbs 2, verse 20. So you may walk in the way of goodness and keep the paths of righteousness. These verses all talk about a specific path, a way of goodness or righteousness. You can't just take any road, going in just any direction, and think you'll end up in the right place. What kind of parent lets a child play with fire or run onto a busy road? In a broader sense, some places are just bad for us to go at any age. And so our God doesn't want us to go there. He wants instead to lead us on the right road to the right place, the place best for us. And He promises to do that, but He will never force us onto that path. We will have to be willing to be led. Someone once asked Jack Kerouac in the last decade of his life a question about the meaning of his existence. Jack wrote out his response in all caps. I don't know, I don't care, and it doesn't make any difference. Wow. Sounds like the road that Jack walked brought him to a dead end, doesn't it? The God revealed in Scripture wants so much better for us. If we will let Him, He will guide us on a path that promises a much better ending. Why not invite God to be your guide right now as we pray? Father, I thank You that if we are willing, You will lead us on the right road, one that leads to wonderful things that we would never find on our own. Heavenly Father, please be our guide. We ask in Jesus' name, Amen. If you've been inspired by this week's program, be sure to join us again next week, when It Is Written will present another new and thought-provoking perspective on the peace, insight, understanding and hope that only the Bible can give us. It Is Written truly is television that changes lives. Until next week, remember, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God.